Hey everyone, my name is Brian Matiash and I'd like to welcome you to episode number 5 of ON1 Inspiration. Now in episode number 4, we visited the beautiful island country of Iceland, and we're sticking around for this episode as well. I'm also very excited to introduce our next guest photographer to ON1 Inspiration. She's an immensely talented photographer and educator, and she also happens to be my lovely wife. So please enjoy this episode of ON1 Inspiration by Nicole S. Young, aka Nicole Z.
Last year, my husband, Brian Matiash, and I went on a trip to Iceland. Now, it was my first time going, so I was pretty excited. We went in the month of June, so we had a lot of potential for a really good light. The sun doesn't really even set in certain times of the year. This is me and Brian on our first night in Iceland. We went to the top of Skogafoss, and we had our picture taken, and things were looking great. You know, the sky was really pretty that day. It was really subtle. Sunset the first night we were there, but we did have some clouds in the sky. But then after that, we seemed to have nothing but either gray sky or blue sky. And so, I'm not really complaining because I was able to get some really great photos that I'm really happy with, such as this from the iceberg. And then, we saw like some really pretty foggy cliffs and some waterfalls. Overcast sky is great for waterfalls. But then we also had these days where it was just completely sunny and bright blue skies. Now, as photographers, we all know that if you photograph landscapes, clouds can oftentimes really make or break your scene. So because we were in Iceland, we had about 10 days there, and we were at this perfect time of year where if the sun sets, the sunset itself, the golden sky can last for hours. It doesn't necessarily just last 10 minutes of the normal sunset that we'd get anywhere else in the world. But finally, on our very last day of shooting, we had a really good stroke of luck. So we went out to this waterfall. This is Foss, and it's kind of an iconic one. I'm sure if you've seen any photos of Iceland, this is probably one of those scenes. It's actually a fairly small waterfall, but with the perspective, it makes it look really big. But you can get a gorgeous sky in the background, especially if the sun is setting. So now this is kind of the early part of the sunset. And then as the sun just kept going down and the sky just really opened up and it just got really gorgeous. So we were in this perfect place for the one sunset we had throughout the entire trip, and we got this. But the great part was that this is not where it stopped. We photographed this, and then we were able to move on. And while we were driving, I saw this scene. And I don't know if this was any particular waterfall, whatever it was. I just saw the scene, and it really stood out. So I asked Brian to pull the car over, and I got a few photos. But we were kind of in a hurry because we had another destination we were headed to. And so instead of trying to get the perfect composition for the scene, I decided to shoot a panorama. And so let me go ahead and highlight these images, and I can show you what they all look like here. So this is my panorama of this scene. I started off pretty far on the left, moved my way to the right, and you can see on the bottom is kind of the scene that I was going for, but I wanted to make sure that I encompassed everything so that way I could go back later and maybe crop in a certain section. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about how I created this panel and maybe what my settings were, take a look at the blog post that goes along with this inspiration clip where I add a little bit more detail about my setup. And so for this tutorial, I'm just going to walk you through kind of a nice, simple edit of this really beautiful scene and kind of show you how I would crop it compositionally to get a nice ending photo so that, something that I may not have seen when I was just standing there in the moment. But just real quickly, let me show you some of the other photos from that same night. We were able to go to this black church out in that same area and had a really nice sunset in the background. And of course, a lupin field where I got, kind of that, like a classic, low to the ground shot with a beautiful sky in the background. So that's the beauty of Iceland. If you go in the summertime, if you get a good sunset, milk it for all it's worth because you get a lot of great shots from just one night. All right, so let's go back into this panorama. I'm in Lightroom here. This is how I process my panoramas. I'm going to select the image, the first image, and then hold that shift key and select the image that would go all the way to the right there. And then I'll go up to Photo Merge, Panorama. So I'll just go ahead and use my auto settings up here on the top, and I might as well just auto crop it while I'm at it. And then I'll select Merge. My panorama is now complete. I'll go ahead and select it, and I'm just going to press the space bar to bring it full screen. Before I bring it into ON1, I'm going to make just a couple minor adjustments to the DNG file here. It's still a raw file after the processing of it as a panorama. I'm just going to use the Quick Develop panel to make a few minor adjustments. I'm going to click on the shadows to the right just to kind of increase some of those shadows. And I'm going to reduce the blacks a little bit. Oops, I'm going to increase those blacks. Sorry about that. As well, just to kind of make the image a little bit more flat. So that way, when I bring it into ON1, I have a little bit more to work with. All right, so my raw file is ready to go. I'm going to bring this into ON1 by going up to File, Plug in Extras, and I'm going to bring this into Layers. So I'm going to open as Layers in ON1 Layers 10. My image opened up inside of ON1 Layers, and the first thing I want to do is crop it. So I'll go over to the left and I'll select the Crop tool. And I'd also like to crop this into a standard size print. So at the top, I'm going to select 2x3. And I'm just going to resize and relocate it. And I really want to focus on that sky. I'm kind of going for this kind of minimalistic look. Let's see if I can even cut that road out. There's a road right there. So let's go ahead and go with that. I'll go ahead and click Apply. And that looks great. I'm going to press H to go to my hand tool to kind of get rid of that crop overlay. Now I'm ready to bring this into effects to really kind of add some color and some punch to it. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is convert this into a smart layer. So I'll click on the gear icon in the Layers panel. And what this does is it allows me to add effects inside of ON1 Effects, add filters or presets or whatever I want to apply. And once I save that, if I go back into Layers, those effects can be re-edited if I double-click them and go back into effects. So all of my changes are not burned into the image. I can actually go back and change them. I kind of like that just as a nice kind of a backup, kind of a fallback option if I decide to make any adjustments down the road. Okay, so I have my image as a smart layer. Now I'll just click Effects to go into ON1 Effects. I'm going to press the Command or Control key and that left arrow to reveal the filters on the left. And the first filter I'd like to add is a color enhancer. I'm going to select the green enhancer and see what that does. I'm going to toggle this on and off to see my change. And I'm going to increase the saturation just a little bit. I think that's off to a pretty good start. I'm going to add another filter. I'm actually going to duplicate and kind of do that same green enhancer because I really want those greens to really glow. I'm even going to play with this hue slider and see if that helps kind of change those greens a little bit. And that does some neat things, but I think it's a little too much, so I'm just going to drop the opacity on that layer, that filter a little bit. And I'm just going to toggle back and forth and see how things are looking. And I think I'm really liking the green at the bottom. That looks great. I'm going to go ahead and add another filter. This time I'd like to add an adjustable gradient because I want to add a little bit of darkness to the sky. So I'll select the adjustable gradient on the top left in the overall settings section. And I'll select darken. I'm going to increase the gradient size a little bit, that feather, and then relocate that up a little bit higher. And I'm also going to drop the opacity of that layer just a little bit. I'm going to toggle that on and off to see how that's looking. And that's pretty good. All right, let's continue editing. I'm going to add another filter. This time I'm going to go into the sunshine filters. These are really great filters, especially for landscape photos, which is what I do quite a lot. And I'm going to view these a little bit bigger so I can kind of see the subtle differences in each of them. I kind of like the glow option. So the only thing I don't like about it is that it's adding a little too much brightness to that sky. Let me go ahead and select the, I'll just go with the sunshine. It's a standard sunshine filter, and that looks pretty good. It did add a little bit too much darkness in the mountain range area, and it did add a little bit of brightness to that bottom one. You know, I think I'm actually going to try that glow one again and see. I'm going to see what that looks like. No, I don't like that. I'm going to go back to sunshine. But to kind of adjust some of these areas, I'm going to select the brush tool. So I'll press B to activate the brush tool. I'll increase the size, and I'm going to change the opacity down to roughly about 50% or so. And then I'm just going to brush over this mountain area. And if you press O, you can actually see where the mask is being applied. And I'm just trying to kind of remove some of that filter from some of those areas. Okay, that's looking great. So I'll go ahead and add another filter. This time I think I want to add a blur. So I'll select the blur category and then just choose normal at the top left. And I'm actually not adding a blur to the image. I'm actually going to use this blur to blend with the layers below it. So I have a nice blur added. And then in this filter over on the right, I'm going to click on this little gear icon, and that allows me to access the blending options. I'm going to select the blending mode and go down to soft light. Then I'm going to reduce that layer opacity roughly about 20% or so. Now I'm going to toggle this on and off and see how that looks. That adds a little bit of a color pop and a little bit of contrast to that image. Now last but not least, let's go ahead and add a vignette to kind of finish this off. I'll add a new filter. Select vignette from the list. The default is subtle, and I think that's going to be a pretty good option. I think this is looking great, so I'm going to go ahead and click apply to save these changes. Now I'm back inside of layers. I'm going to save my file, and this is just to save my changes. It's always good to do this every so often. Now I'm going to go into enhance and just make a few subtle adjustments to the image before I'm finished with it. I'll go ahead and access the quick fixes section and hide the other two. Now what I'd like to do is add a little bit of brightness to the shadow area. So I'm just going to click on that shadow plus icon. And I'm going to darken some of those highlights. So I'll just kind of do the opposite there. The minus button on that little minus toggle on the highlight section. Going to add a little bit of detail. And then I'll increase some of the color as well. I don't want to go too much, because if you add too much vibrance or too much saturation to a landscape photo, it can start to look a little too surrealistic. I'm just going to toggle this on and off and see how that looks. I also notice a little spot up at the top there, so I'm going to select the retouch brush and dab that away. I see another one up there at the top too. And I'm just going to toggle my preview mode real quickly with that backslash key. That did a really nice job. Okay, I'm finished here. I'll go ahead and click apply. And back in layers, I'll go ahead and save the file. To learn more about me and to see some of my work, please visit my website at nicolesy.com.